The little red light on the card reader sneered. It was a sharp rejection echoing louder than the low hum of the air conditioning unit overhead, which had been rattling for nearly 4 years, because Director Garrison Croft preferred spending the maintenance budget on retreats in Cabo. I stood on the granite entry threshold holding my lanyard, looking at the glass doors of Aegis Corporate Solutions like an investigator inspecting an unreported crime scene. The tinted glass reflected my expression, 54 years of practiced neutrality gray eyes, and a posture projecting middle management passivity while concealing the tactical reflexes of a senior forensic specialist. "Card trouble, Drake?" The voice boomed behind me, heavy with forced camaraderie. It was Bradley Higgins, our newly appointed chief of facility security. Higgins was a former municipal officer dismissed from 2 police departments for insubordination. He spent his days patrolling corporate hallways full of defense accountants as if leading a Marine unit through enemy territory. He smelled of cheap aftershave and deep insecurity. "It is red, Higgins," I said, keeping my tone flat. Usually that means the monthly fee was not cleared, or someone in human resources pressed the wrong button. "Director Croft wants a word with you immediately," Higgins said, hooking his thumbs into his tactical belt. "Escorted entry only, Drake. Hand over your primary access badge right now." I turned around slowly and looked at him, taking in the sheen of perspiration on his upper lip and the nervous twitch in his left eye. He was performing stage theater meant to intimidate me. "Lead the way, Higgins," I said calmly. His jaw tightened. He swiped his supervisor pass across the scanner, and the pneumatic doors hissed open. The corporate interior smelled of stale coffee, copier ozone, and the quiet despair of 250 employees, realizing the weekend was 4 days away. As Higgins marched me down the central corridor, heads popped up over cubicle dividers. Clara Vance from Accounts Payable looked away instantly, pretending to analyze paper invoices. Word travels through a defense contracting firm faster than an emergency broadcast network. In a corporate ecosystem built on government grants, the scent of an executive purge is unmissable. Higgins marched me past my glass-walled office, a modest 10 by 10 foot space, where I had spent 14 long years pretending to care about routine OSHA compliance and workplace safety seminars. He led me straight toward the mahogany double doors at the end of the executive wing. The director's suite was massive. Garrison Croft sat behind a desk crafted from reclaimed teak wood. He was 56 years old, tanned to the color of a weathered saddle, with aggressively whitened teeth. He was flanked by 2 corporate attorneys wearing tailored charcoal suits, men who looked sculpted out of legal cynicism. "Julian," Croft said, not bothering to stand up. He gestured casually toward a leather armchair positioned lower than his executive swivel seat, a classic power dynamic tactic. I remained standing near the center of the room. "Garrison," I replied smoothly. "Higgins here seems convinced I am a flight risk. He is standing so close behind me, I am concerned he might ask me out for dinner." Higgins bristled near the doorway. Croft offered a thin smile. "We have conducted a review of our operational overhead." "Julian," Croft announced, tapping his gold pen against a folder, "the board is determined that your services as senior compliance auditor are no longer required, effective immediately." The silence that settled over the office was heavy. I let it stretch across the room. In interrogation scenarios, the person who speaks first after a major declaration loses leverage. The attorney sitting on the left twitched first, shifting his weight. "Let me guess," I said mildly, offering them the narrative pivot they expected. "Internal restructuring and organizational realignment." "Precisely," Croft said, relieved that I was adopting the corporate script. "We are modernizing our compliance architecture. Your methodologies are legacy, archaic. We require fresh eyes and agile personnel who understand rapid turnarounds needed for Department of Defense subcontracts." Modern agility was the corporate euphemism for hiring an inexperienced junior auditor who would fail to notice millions funneled into offshore shell accounts each quarter. "I see," I said. "And what about my 14 years of institutional documentation, active audit trails, and our delicate standing with the Department of Labor?" "We have everything fully managed," Croft declared, waving his hand. "Human Resources has prepared a severance package. We are offering 3 full weeks of continued salary, provided you execute a non-disclosure agreement and execute a complete waiver of your rights under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. They wanted to purchase my complete silence regarding 14 years of financial manipulation for the price of a mid-sized sedan. I am afraid I will not be signing that agreement, Garrison, I said softly. Croft's smile vanished entirely. Signing the release is not optional if you wish to receive your final compensation, Julian. I do not want your severance check, Garrison. I want to ensure you are entirely certain about this decision, because once I step across the threshold of this facility, I will no longer be available to shield this firm from regulatory consequences. Croft let out a sharp laugh. Shield me? You organize our annual fire drills and manage potlucks, Julian. As Higgins escorted me down the hallway toward the glass exits past rows of silent colleagues, I felt neither embarrassment nor resentment. Instead, a cold clarity settled in my chest. It was the mental calibration a marksman feels when adjusting optics for wind direction. Croft and his legal team believed they were discarding an overpaid compliance officer. They did not realize they had just severed the containment line, protecting their entire operation from federal asset seizure. I walked out into the bright parking lot. Higgins stood inside the glass entryway, arms crossed over his chest, watching my movement. I opened the door of my sedan, sat behind the steering wheel, and reached deep into my inner jacket pocket. My fingers touched the cool brass and leather of my secondary wallet, the one containing my official credentials and the silver emblem beneath the badge holder. Enjoy your victory lap, gentlemen, I whispered into the quiet interior of my car. You just pulled the trigger on your own destruction. My private residence is located 20 miles outside the industrial park, a quiet mid-century home designed with minimalist discipline. There are no ornamental distractions or unnecessary clutter. It is a sterile sanctuary created to provide absolute security. I took off my dark leather shoes, placed my keys in the hallway tray, and walked directly to the rear study. To any casual visitor, the room appeared to be an ordinary home office, featuring an oak desk, a reading chair, and a generic landscape painting on the wall. However, sliding the heavy bookshelf 4 inches to the right and applying pressure to a specific floorboard joint revealed a hidden access panel built into the wall framing. I opened the concealed vault. It contained rows of organized steel file boxes filled with paper documents. Digital file storage can be remotely wiped, encrypted, or corrupted by remote administrators. Physical paper, however, is immutable. Paper is heavy, persistent, and undeniable in a federal courtroom. Nobody wants to manually review 14 years of physical billings, freight manifests, and offshore bank routing logs. Nobody except a forensic investigator. I retrieved a thick black binder designated Subcontractor Asset Audit Group 7. This folder contained 14 years of quiet evidence collection. I had begun compiling these records during my very first month at Aegis Corporate Solutions, long before Garrison Croft realized that his compliance auditor possessed advanced training from federal academies. I sat at my desk and opened the primary ledger. I poured a glass of water, keeping my mind calm and focused. Then I booted up my personal workstation, a custom-built unit featuring military-grade encryption protocols and isolated communication hardware. I logged into an encrypted backdoor portal I had embedded within the primary Aegis server network 6 years ago, disguised as an automated printer protocol update. As diagnostic logs scrolled across my monitor, I saw that Croft's team was already operating in panic mode. Predictable, I murmured to myself. I watched as Higgins' administrative login credentials clumsily navigated through the human resources database, revoking my building credentials, deleting my internal email profile, and attempting to purge my local audit records. Higgins was using a sledgehammer where a surgeon's scalpel was required. By deleting primary file indexes without scrubbing underlying system metadata, he was creating a permanent forensic record of intentional evidence destruction under federal spoliation rules. Every time he clicked delete, he left a digital signature screaming intent to conceal fraud. The true brilliance of the operation lay in what Croft and his attorneys had completely overlooked. 8 months ago, Croft had grown remarkably bold. He was no longer satisfied with skimming small percentages off logistics margins. He began siphoning millions directly from primary Department of Defense contracts. He created a shell entity named Vanguard Defense Logistics, registered to a post office box in Delaware, to generate falsified shipping manifests for military hardware. To capture this activity without alerting Croft legal counsel, I had created a ghost entity of my own within the vendor database, an organization named Veridian Tactical Supplies. I routed vendor authorization paperwork through Croft rubber stamp approval system. Croft had signed the subcontracts without reading embedded compliance attachments, eager to collect his kickback. What Croft failed to realize was that Veridian Tactical Supplies was structured to operate in absolute compliance with Federal Acquisition Regulation Clause 44B. Under federal procurement laws, any vendor operating under Regulation 44B requires mandatory automated real-time offsite record mirroring for all associated digital communications, billing invoices, and executive correspondence. By signing that contract, Garrison Croft had legally authorized an external Department of Justice server to maintain a continuous, unalterable mirror of every email, text message, and accounting entry generated by his office. He believed he was approving another fraudulent vendor scheme. In reality, he had executed a legally binding consent form for his own federal wiretap. I opened the active data feed from the Veridian Mirror server. The system was running perfectly, capturing incoming data streams in real time. Among the newest records was an urgent email sent by Croft to his personal criminal defense attorney less than 45 minutes after my departure. Subject: Compliance Auditor terminated. Body: The obstacle has been removed. Higgins escorted Drake off the property without incident. Purge shared network drive records immediately. He has zero knowledge of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. We are entirely safe to proceed with the quarterly transfer. I took a slow sip of water. The sheer arrogance of his message was breathtaking. Croft truly believed that because I wore quiet suits, brought my lunch in a paper bag, and organized workplace safety seminars, I was incapable of detecting complex corporate fraud. He believed compliance officer meant helpless pushover. I picked up a secure mobile device from my desk drawer and dialed a private number that appeared in no corporate directory. The line rang once before a gravelly voice answered. "Status report, Asset Drake," the voice said without greeting. This was Handler Zero, my direct supervisor, within the Department of Justice Corporate Fraud Division. "The cover operation is complete," I reported calmly. "Garrison Croft executed my termination this morning. Did they suspect your federal status?" Zero asked. "Not at all," I replied, turning a page in my ledger. "Croft acted out of pure greed and arrogance. He is attempting to accelerate the transfer of stolen defense funds before the end of the fiscal quarter. Mayor has a way of preserving specific details with absolute clarity, especially when recorded on federal surveillance equipment." As I sat in my quiet study reviewing evidence, my mind drifted back 5 years to the annual Defense Contractors Charity Gala held at the Grand Hyatt Hotel. The grand ballroom had been filled with high-ranking executives, corporate lobbyists, and defense officials wearing expensive tuxedos and formal gowns. It was an environment where executives, who charged the federal government $950 for standard folding chairs, routinely congratulated themselves for donating $5,000 to local charities. I had attended the event in my official role as senior compliance auditor, carrying Croft extra business cards and monitoring his schedule. In truth, I was carrying a digital audio recorder hidden inside a leather pen case tucked into my jacket pocket. Garrison Croft had been 3 glasses of single malt scotch deep into the evening, holding court near an ice sculpture carved into the shape of a stealth aircraft. He had been shouting over the band to a group of junior executives from competing firms. "It is entirely a volume game, gentlemen," Croft had declared, laughing loudly while slapping a younger manager on the shoulder. "You think profit margins are built into engineering? Absolute nonsense. The real money is in expedited logistics fees, administrative padding, and consulting overhead." One of the younger managers had asked nervously, "But Garrison, does the Defense Contract Audit Agency not scrutinize those expedited shipping manifests during annual reviews?" Croft had roared with laughter, spilling a portion of his drink onto the carpet. "Scrutinize? Those auditors do not have the staff or budget to audit a neighborhood lemonade stand. You bury expenses inside miscellaneous technical support line items. You charge the government $6,500 for a routine site inspection because it was designated as an urgent tactical deployment. It is not fraud if the procurement officer signs the authorization check. I had been standing 4 feet away, looking completely oblivious while adjusting my necktie to ensure the microphone recorded every word of his confession. Croft had turned toward me, waving his arm carelessly. "Drake, get over here. Tell these gentlemen about our last internal review regarding labor hour reclassifications." I had stepped forward, maintaining a polite corporate smile. "You mean when you reclassified our building maintenance personnel as senior environmental compliance specialists in order to bill their time at 4 times their actual hourly rate, sir?" The surrounding group had gone quiet for a brief moment. Croft had blinked, then let out a booming laugh. "You see, he understands how the game is played. Best administrative asset in the entire corporation." "Senior compliance auditor," I had corrected him silently in my mind. "He is a complete vault." Croft had whispered loudly to the younger manager, dropping his voice into a tone that my microphone captured perfectly. "Never complains, never asks uncomfortable questions. He just fixes documentation and files receipts. That is the exact type of employee you need in this industry. Not intelligent enough to understand the bigger picture, but organized enough to keep the paper trail clean. Not intelligent enough. That exact phrase had defined my approach to this investigation for 5 years. Croft's arrogance was his ultimate blind spot. He viewed everyone around him as tools or appliances meant to serve his ambition. Back in the present, sitting at my workstation, I opened the digital file containing that historical recording. That single audio track proved intentional fraud, systemic corruption, and a complete breach of fiduciary duty under corporate law. It established that Croft's actions were not administrative errors, but a calculated criminal enterprise. It was time to execute Phase 3 of the operation. Tuesday morning brought heavy rainfall across the city, turning the sky into slate gray. Sitting at my kitchen table with fresh dark coffee, I monitored digital activity across the Aegis corporate network. Croft had brought in an outside digital security consultant to purge company servers. I watched network traffic spike erratically. It was sloppy, chaotic work, the digital equivalent of a panicking executive throwing loose documents into an open fire. My internal contact within the Human Resources Department, Clara Vance, sent me a message via an encrypted messaging application disguised as a mobile puzzle game. "Clara, the office is in absolute chaos. Higgins is marching around the second floor interrogating junior analysts, asking if anyone ever saw you using unauthorized flash drives. Julian, tell him I used to eat flash drives with my morning breakfast. It provides excellent dietary fiber." Clara, very funny. Seriously though, Croft hired an independent IT consultant who claims he can permanently erase server archives by noon. I tapped into the security camera feed, monitoring the central server room. Default factory access passwords on network cameras had never been updated, despite 4 separate compliance memos I had issued over 3 years. I watched as a young technician plugged a diagnostic laptop into the primary switch cabinet, running a file deletion script. I smiled faintly as I monitored his progress. The technician was merely deleting directory indexes while leaving underlying raw data intact on solid-state drives, perfectly preserved for federal forensic recovery teams. I decided to accelerate their panic. I opened a command interface on my workstation and executed a diagnostic script I had prepared weeks earlier. The script generated a localized data transfer spike within a dormant network folder labeled Archive 2020 Executive Personal. On the security camera feed, I watched the IT technician freeze. He pointed frantically at his monitor, signaling to Higgins, who had just entered the server room. By Wednesday morning, the storm had cleared, leaving city air crisp and cold. At 9:45 in the morning, the first news story broke on the Federal Ledger, an influential legal watchdog publication monitored by defense procurement officials across the nation. The article detailed an ongoing federal investigation into an unnamed defense contractor in Ohio, citing systematic invoice padding, ghost vendor creation, and severe violations of federal procurement statutes. Although the article did not explicitly name Aegis Corporate Solutions, it included a redacted copy of a $950 invoice for commercial folding chairs. Within 15 minutes of publication, the executive office at Aegis was in absolute turmoil. I drove my sedan into the Aegis corporate parking lot at precisely 10 o'clock. The parking space reserved for senior compliance staff remained empty, as if my former colleagues were afraid to pull their vehicles into the zone I had occupied for 14 years. I turned off the engine, adjusted my suit jacket, and walked toward the primary glass entrance. My heart rate remained entirely steady. There was no hesitation in my stride. I had mentally rehearsed this moment through countless hours of quiet observation and patient preparation. I stepped through automated glass doors. The reception lobby was silent except for the nervous whispers of Sarah, the front desk receptionist. When she saw me walk across the marble floor, her eyes widened in absolute shock. She reached frantically for her desk phone, pressing the speed dial button for facility security. "He is here," Sarah whispered urgently into the receiver. "Higgins, Drake is back in the building." I did not pause. I continued walking toward the central elevator bank. Before I reached the doors, the emergency stairwell opened violently, and Bradley Higgins charged into the lobby like an enraged bull. His uniform jacket was unbuttoned, his tie was crooked, and his face was flushed with anger. "You!" Higgins roared, pointing a finger at my chest as he closed the distance between us. "You are actively trespassing on private corporate property. I have a formal restraining order pending against you. If you do not leave this premises immediately, I will physically restrain you and hold you for municipal law enforcement." Several employees watching from the second-floor balcony leaned over the railing, whispering nervously among themselves. Higgins wanted a public display of dominance. He wanted to demonstrate to remaining staff that he maintained total control of the facility. I stopped in the center of the marble foyer, placing my hands calmly into the pockets of my dark trench coat. I did not raise my voice, nor did I adopt an aggressive stance. "I would strongly advise against putting your hands on me, Higgins," I said softly. My voice carried clearly across the lobby, quiet and absolute. "I am giving you 5 seconds to turn around and walk out those doors," Higgins shouted, stepping within 3 feet of me and reaching out his right hand to grab my shoulder. "Stop right there," I commanded. The sharp tone of authority in my voice caused him to hesitate. For the first time, Higgins looked directly into my eyes and saw complete confidence. The bravado in his posture began to falter as a subtle wave of doubt crossed his mind. Slowly and deliberately, I withdrew my right hand from my coat pocket. I was holding a heavy, black leather badge wallet. Not the plastic ID holder issued by Aegis, but a formal federal credential case. "You demanded my official badge on Tuesday morning, Higgins," I said cleanly. "Here it is." I flipped the leather wallet open, presenting the polished gold emblem of the United States Department of Justice, flanked by my official photograph and federal asset identification seal. Higgins sneered, though his voice lacked conviction. "What is this supposed to be? Some fake badge you bought online?" He snatched the leather case from my hand and looked down at the credential card. As his eyes processed official federal seals, Department of Justice authorization text, and my designated rank, color rapidly drained from his face. "Turn it over, Higgins," I instructed quietly. His hands began to tremble as he flipped the badge holder over. Affixed to the rear metallic casing was a silver holographic seal displaying asset code A7329, accompanied by bold lettering reading, "Department of Justice. Asset, Naughton. Federal Obscuration, Lao." Higgins let out a sharp gasp. He dropped the credential wallet as if it had suddenly turned white-hot in his hands. It struck the marble floor with a heavy thud. He took 2 frantic steps backward, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. You are a federal agent?" Higgins stammered, his voice cracking with panic. "Director Croft said you were just an administrative worker. He said you were nobody." "Garrison Croft lies about everything, Higgins," I replied smoothly. "He lied about billing manifests, labor hours, and my background. You should have checked my complete record before agreeing to execute his illegal orders." The entire lobby went completely silent. Sarah at the front desk sat frozen with her hand pressed over her mouth. The employees watching from the balcony stood motionless, staring down at the scene in disbelief. I did not leave the corporate plaza. I walked to a stone bench near the central fountain, sat down in morning sunlight, and waited patiently. The glass building rose before me, a modern monument built on falsified invoices and systemic corporate greed. Precisely 30 minutes later, the federal task force arrived. Professional federal asset seizures are executed with quiet, overwhelming precision. 4 dark utility vehicles pulled smoothly up to the main curb in perfect alignment. 12 federal agents wearing dark jackets bearing federal tactical insignia stepped out of vehicles. Leading the team was Agent Howard Grant, a veteran investigator with whom I had worked on 3 major corporate fraud cases over the past decade. He spotted me sitting by the fountain and gave a single firm nod. I stood up from the bench and joined the phalanx as they marched into the building. The front lobby was entirely deserted. Higgins had fled to his private office, and the front desk was vacant. Agent Grant immediately split his team into tactical units. Secure all server access points and digital storage vaults, Agent Grant commanded firmly. Prevent any removal of electronic hardware or paper documentation. 6 agents moved swiftly toward lower-level server rooms, while Agent Grant, 3 senior investigators, and I entered the executive elevator. The quiet ascent to the top floor took less than 20 seconds. When elevator doors opened onto the executive suite, the hall was filled with chaotic activity. Junior administrators were frantically feeding stacks of documents into hallway shredders. Federal agents, step away from all machinery and keep your hands visible. Agent Grant boomed, his voice echoing down the corridor. Shredding machines were immediately turned off. Employees raised their hands in the air, stepping back from desks in shock. We marched directly to mahogany double doors of the director's suite. The doors were locked from inside. Agent Grant raised his right boot and delivered a powerful kick directly next to the heavy brass lock mechanism. Solid wood splintered with a loud crack, and double doors swung wide open. Garrison Croft was sitting behind his teak desk. He was not reviewing files or making phone calls. He was staring blankly at the wall. His expensive silk tie lay discarded on the floor, and an open bottle of high-end scotch sat on his desk, half empty. He looked completely broken, his face pale and aged by 20 years and 48 hours. He looked up slowly as we entered the room, his bloodshot eyes locking onto mine. "Drake," Croft rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. You were the informant within my organization." "I was not an informant, Garrison," I said, stepping into the office and placing a thick black binder onto his desk. "An informant leaks information. I was the federal architect who designed the compliance framework that trapped you." Agent Grant stepped forward, placing a heavy steel briefcase onto the conference table and opening latches. Inside were certified paper ledgers, mirrored server logs from Veridian Tactical Supplies, and recorded audio files spanning 14 years. "This folder contains every fraudulent transaction executed by Aegis Corporate Solutions under your direction since 2012, I informed Croft. "It details every padded logistics bill, every illegal kickback paid to offshore shell accounts, and every instance of military procurement fraud under the False Claims Act." Croft twitched nervously, clutching the edge of his desk. "You cannot prove criminal intent. My accounting staff made administrative errors. I had no direct knowledge of those line-item discrepancies. We have your personal signature on the Veridian Tactical Supplies contract." "Garrison," I stated firmly. "We have automated server logs recorded under Regulation 44B, and we have the complete audio recording from the defense contractor's gala, where you explicitly stated that padding federal invoices was your primary business strategy." Croft's face turned ash gray. He slumped back into his leather chair, the last remaining vestige of his arrogant composure evaporating entirely. Furthermore, Agent Grant added, "Your executive secretary, Eileen Baxter, is currently providing sworn testimony to the United States Attorney regarding offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands." Croft stared at us in absolute defeat. He was no longer the arrogant corporate titan who had sneered at me from behind his teak desk 2 days ago. He was simply a common criminal caught in an unescapable federal snare. "Who are you?" Croft whispered, his voice trembling. "You spent 14 years making coffee, filing routine compliance reports, and organizing office potlucks." "I am Senior Federal Asset 7329, I answered smoothly. "And for 14 years, I served you decaffeinated coffee every single morning because I knew your blood pressure needed monitoring." Agent Grant stepped forward, drawing steel handcuffs from his belt. Garrison Croft, you are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, federal wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and spoliation of evidence. As agents pulled Croft's arms behind his back and secured steel cuffs around his wrists, he looked at me one final time with profound confusion. "Why did you wait 14 years?" Croft asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "Why did you wait so long to act?" "Because Garrison," I replied, leaning across his desk. "I wanted to ensure your tower was built high enough so that when I removed the foundation, absolutely nothing would survive the collapse." They escorted Croft out of Executive B Suite, his head bowed in shame as he was led past former employees. Over the next 4 hours, Aegis corporate headquarters was systematically transformed into an active federal evidence seizure zone. Federal agents cataloged hard drives, boxed up physical ledgers, and secured every server bank in the facility. I sat in a quiet conference room with Agent Grant and a representative from the Department of Defense Inspector General Office. All defense contracts associated with Aegis Corporate Solutions have been formally suspended, the Inspector General representative stated, reviewing her digital tablet. Lockheed Raytheon has terminated their partnership completely. Company assets are frozen, and liquidation proceedings will commence next week. "Excellent work, Julian," Agent Grant said, sliding a confidential folder across the table. "The division director has already approved your next assignment. A major aerospace firm in Virginia has shown significant accounting anomalies within their drone development division. We need a senior undercover auditor to penetrate their executive board." I looked down at the folder, then gently pushed it back across the table. "I am declining the assignment, Howard," I said quietly. Agent Grant frowned in surprise. "Declining? You are one of the most effective forensic assets in the entire Department of Justice. You have another decade of service before mandatory retirement. 14 years of living a double life inside a corrupt corporate environment is enough," I explained. "I am submitting my formal retirement papers today. I intend to draw my federal pension, move to a quiet property near the coast, and live a peaceful life." Agent Grant studied my face for a long moment, then let out a quiet sigh. He nodded respectfully and closed the file folder. "I cannot fault your decision, Julian. You spent 14 years sitting in the lion den, and you brought down one of the largest procurement fraud operations in the state. The taxpayers owe you a debt of gratitude." "The taxpayers may keep the change, Howard," I replied with a subtle smile. I stood up, shook hands with the federal team, and walked out onto the primary office floor for the last time. The chaotic hum of corporate activity had vanished entirely. The phones were silent, the copiers were off, and the cubicles were empty.